What's up? How you doing? I am David Long, here to talk to you guys today about your questions and answers. How are y'all doing? Is everybody doing good? Let me see. Let me check my balance here on the. Yeah. I hope everybody's feeling good today. I got a couple questions from you. I'm gonna go into them. Let's see, can I give you any kind of updates or anything before I get too into it? Lots of things in the works. I've been staying really busy. I hope you guys are liking that new pre-trans fallacy video I recently put out. Again, if you have any kind of questions while we're doing this live Q&A, I think if you type them down below, they'll pop up on this screen and I'll be able to get to them. If you're watching this video later, I'm gonna be doing these live Q&As every couple weeks, so I would advise you to join my I Am David Long Friends and Fans group, because that's where the conversation is happening. And yeah, if you're watching this later also, feel free to go ahead and type up a question down there and I'll answer it either this time or next time. What's up, Jarrett? Thanks for coming to the Q&A, buddy. Hope you're doing well today. Let's jump into a question. Joey asks, he said, what benefits the page better? Having me as the dispenser of info and others as my audience, or a symbiotic effect of info simply being shared? Is there a way to do both subtly? It's a good question. Really, I'm trying to start a conversation. And I'd like there to be action happening in this group a lot where people can feel comfortable to talk, to put things out there. So I don't want it to be just me talking. I'm trying to do this question and answer thing to get the ball rolling. And I could maybe ask you some questions too, the general audience. But a lot of what I've done so far in my group, I've asked questions and I've put some things out there and I haven't really got a lot of feedback yet. So basically what I'm doing here is with this kind of thing is not to try to be the dispenser of knowledge and information, but to get it started, to get this kind of conversation going. I'd like this page to be active. I would like to be schooled and to be challenged myself, and I'm sure I will be the more and more people get involved. So if there's anything that you think that I can do to better help this process, to engage you and other people in the conversation and the discussion, I'm totally open to any kind of ideas. In fact, what we're doing right now, this live Q&A, was the idea of a friend of mine, Brendan. What's up, Brendan? Hope you're doing well, and I think it's a good idea. I think it's a great way to potentially get it going. So hopefully that works. Again, it's totally open to your ideas. If you have some suggestions or whatever, type them up, put them in there down below. Alyosha asks, what's my position on polygamy? It's a tough question, you know, it really depends on the situation, how many people are involved in this polygamy. Maybe the best thing to do, right? The best position would be to like stack them up. No. I'm kidding. Kind of. I don't know. I've never been a polygamist. Maybe I would stack them up. You know, who knows? It's something I'd be interested to know more about, frankly. No, but in all seriousness, I think it's an interesting question. I definitely think the old-fashioned roles and traditions of monogamy are kind of outdated. I'm very jaded and skeptical about the idea that a relationship will last. It seems like a lot of what happens biologically is that nature is kind of tricking us to try to get us to have kids and reproduce. If you don't have kids with somebody, I feel like it's going to be really hard to make your relationship last longer than like 3 to 5 years. You know, it really depends on what the dynamic is like. But those first falling in love feelings only last so long, and you really have to do a lot of work to keep that going. And you know, it helps to have gone through some stuff with a person. You can definitely build bonds. What's up, James? Hope you're doing well, buddy. You can definitely build bonds with a person by going through some stuff with them. You can build connection over time. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I do think that a lot of the biological and psychological stuff that allows for relationships in the beginning kind of fade and fall apart if unnurtured over time. And if you don't have kids, I feel like a lot of people end up staying together and making it work for the kids. It's not like they would necessarily be staying with a person if they didn't have kids with them. I feel like that's a big factor. Now, how this relates back to polygamy is, I think that pretty much any kind of a consensual relationship is fine. Legally fine, at least, right? Morally fine, at least. Of course, people do get jealous. It's the rare person, I think, who doesn't feel those kinds of jealousies. But I mean, if you were with somebody and they were bisexual, or, you know, it was like a lesbian couple and they were bisexual and they wanted to include you and everybody felt good about it, it could potentially work. I think open relationships are a little bit problematic. It's hard because you got to parse these things out a little bit. Asking whether you have a moral problem with it is different than asking if you think it's going to be healthy and it's going to work. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of potential complications that could go into it. But I could totally see these things working out very practically given the right kind of circumstances. Like, I could see how an open relationship would probably lead to the end of your relationship unless you had kids with that someone. And then probably you want to have an open relationship because you're not really getting what you want and what you need from your current partner. Instead of breaking it up with them because they're like a good father or a good mother or something like that, you want to be able to figure out a way to have your cake and eat it too. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. But I mean, whether it will work long term, how it's going to play out, that's yet to be seen. I don't know if there's been a lot of studies on those kinds of things. But if you know about some of that stuff, some of the studies around polygamy or different alternative kinds of relationships, and you're interested in this kind of stuff, let's get the discussion going down below. Post something about some of this stuff and let's discuss it. I think it's a really interesting topic. Again, in terms of ethics, I don't necessarily have a problem with it, but I am skeptical of the psychology around it. And it seems a lot of times when people discuss these ideas, they do like a false binary where they compare pros and cons of polygamy to the pros and cons of monogamy. And they act like polygamy is a potential solution to the problems of monogamy. Like, they'll go, oh, here's a problem of monogamy. Half of monogamous relationships end in divorce. But is polygamy a solution to that problem? I don't think so. I think it's just as likely that those marriages are going to end in divorce. And also, why is the marriage ending in divorce a problem, right? Maybe divorce isn't necessarily a problem. What's up, Matthew? Matt, my homie, haven't seen you in a while. I hope you're doing well, brother. Just talking about polygamy at the moment and different options and possibilities in terms of love relationships. And I was just saying that often they compare polygamy to monogamy. And one of the stats they bring up is that most marriages end in divorce. And I'm saying maybe that's not a bad thing. Like, I've been divorced. I've had people kind of throw it in my face too, like, well, you got divorced, so you must not be that good of a person. I was married for 10 years without having a kid to hold the relationship together. I think if you have a 10-year-long relationship, that is a pretty big success. I don't really know very many people who have had relationships that have lasted 10 years from the time that they're 20 to the time that they're 30. I don't see that as a failure, which isn't to say that I'm not willing to examine the ways in which I might have messed it up or I could do better. Certainly, I have thought a lot about these kinds of things, and I have refined, and hopefully, I'm doing better. Hopefully I won't be too much repeating the same problems of the past in future relationships. But at the same time, you can't see a 10-year relationship as a failure. That's unrealistic. So I hope all that rambling gives some kind of an answer to what's my position on polygamy. I'm open to the idea of it. Again, with the stacking, I think it could be good. Andreas asks, what is spiritual bypassing, for one? And two, how to deal with the emptiness witness addiction? What are your guidelines to find a healthy balance between detachment and involvement? These are great questions. These questions are like, mwah. You're the man, Andreas. I think that's how you say his name, Andreas. Correct me if I'm wrong. So let's start with this first question. What is spiritual bypassing? Spiritual bypassing is avoidance in holy robes, a spiritualized avoidance. Basically, anytime when you're making a virtue of ignorance or a virtue of avoiding something or a virtue of not getting involved or not caring about something. And there's versions of it in every single religious tradition. The Buddhist versions of it are when you act like the world's an illusion, that it's all just the drama of life, it's all just suffering, and I'm transcending it, I'm beyond it. I'm free of it. To me, if you're really enlightened, you're 100% at one with everything. There's no free of everything. You're deeply involved. The thing to do on a spiritual path, if you're really open and honest and engaged and awakened, is to get deeply involved, not to try and bypass everything and act like you don't care about it. There are versions of this in Christianity where it's like, Lord, take the wheel, let go and let God. Certainly, there are things that are out of our control, and to some extent, the thing to do is to do what you're going to do and then let it go. You can only do what you're going to do. But if by let go and let God, or just have faith, or any of these things, what you mean is that you're not going to try, or that you're not going to do work, or that you're not going to get involved, that's unhealthy. I mean, even faith can be a bypass. It can be like someone's bringing you real criticisms, evidence to the contrary, and you fall back on faith. If there was good reasons and evidence, what would be the value of faith? The only reason that a person needs faith is when there's not good reasons and evidence and proof. If you have proof, you don't need faith. You see what I'm saying? But it can also be things like judging people for judging people, all of these extreme positions about all loving and extending care and compassion to everything without being critical. I mean, sometimes you have to be open to criticism. When people care about you, when they care about your projects, they're going to be critical. And if you just bypass that criticism with your egoic, your judging, you should have faith, you're not really going to be able to grow or learn. That's not real engagement. That's falling back into trusting dogma and just blindly following. That's not real spiritual engagement. That's not a real healthy spiritual path. That's like a religious, dogmatic follower kind of a path. That turns out to be what the main problem with a lot of these kinds of spiritual bypassing approaches is, that it's really indicative of an uncritical approach to dogmatic spiritual ideas that doesn't really take into account the way that using those ideas can be problematic or harmful, or that keep us from really caring and engaging and serving others. So I would say healthy spirituality is not about avoidance, it's about engagement, it's about love and care and really being here. Okay, let's deal with this second part of the question. How to deal with the emptiness witness addiction, and what are healthy guidelines to find a balance between detachment and involvement. This idea about healthy guidelines and a balance is that you can become too passionate, too engaged, too caught up, to the point where you care so much that you become unskillful. You care so much that it's getting in the way of you being able to just do all that you can do and then just let it go. So we need to have some kind of a balance to where we're not Iceman and just cut off, dispassionate and disengaged, and where we're also not so caught up that we're like losing our shit and like unable to calm down and be patient and engage skillfully. I would say that's how you find the balance. And you can tell because the world will tell you when you don't care enough or when you care too much. Which is not to say whatever kind of feedback people give you is the absolute truth, but it is to say that if you hear it over and over again from different people, then there's probably something to it. We need to be receptive to feedback and take a good hard look, not just be defensive. You gotta really check yourself. And there really is a problem in Buddhism with this over-spiritualized glorification of pure witnessing or just being here now, which is kind of why I think it's good to include some of the Christian ideas, because if you look at the Jesus archetype, he is not just an all-loving kind of passive figure. He gets deeply involved. He starts a riot at the temple. He gets all up in people's business and shakes their reality. He's a very critical figure, but also he is all loving because everything he's doing is out of service. When he engages, he is God in human form in service to the other person, even if that shows up as criticism in the moment. So if you could step out of this just witnessing everything kind of spiritual practice and also embrace this idea of being the incarnation of love. Your body is a temple, and that we're all part of hands and feet of the body of Christ, and we need to serve each other. We need to be the hands and feet of God, of love, to other people. Like, I think that there is something to this idea of when you find yourself in a situation and you're enlightened and you have the knowledge and the wisdom to know better, and you see another person struggling, who's gonna help them but you? Unless there's someone else around who is also in your same shoes, it's your job to help them. In fact, that's you that's struggling. A lot of people don't want to help other people because it's inconvenient and because it's hard, and so they make a virtue of not judging and just letting other people have their thing, you know, well, it doesn't harm me, all these kinds of things. If you're really deeply in touch with this understanding of absolute unity, this kind of spiritual path, you're going to become deeply engaged. Now, of course, you can only do what you can do. There has to be a level of detachment. You're there. You're going to let yourself be known as a person who can help in this situation. And from a caring, non-egoic, non-self-righteous, not about me being the teacher and you being the student, but about like a real caring engagement. If you can come at it from this kind of open, unattached, I'm here to help you, I'm here to serve you, I'm here to love you kind of a perspective, and they don't want to have it, you tried. You were there. God was there in that moment trying to speak to them, and their heart was too hard, their ego was too much in the way, they were too much possessed by the demons of their bad ideas, and you weren't able to deal with that. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. But if the student isn't ready, the teacher needs to be smart enough not to cast his pearls before swine and waste his time passionately trying to help this person who doesn't want to be helped. This is a problem I sometimes have had, and it's something I'm definitely learning. You gotta keep an eye out for that person who's really gonna see the value that you bring, and then fully invest your time in them because they really want to learn. And let people who don't want to learn, who can't be helped, fall on their face. Maybe after a couple more cycles of falling on their face, they'll be able to learn. But you can only do what you can do. So that's kind of the more practical version of this question. Let's talk about the meditative be here now kind of aspect of this question, because I think it's interesting to think about it as a spiritual practice, not just as a service practice, but in terms of how much should I be witnessing and being here now, and how much should I be engaging? I think it depends on the situation and the circumstance. For example, I think that Eckhart Tolle says it really well when he says, the problem is not that we don't use our mind rightly. The problem is that we don't use our mind at all. The mind uses us. So the problem is unconscious living. The problem is when the mind is like this thing that has possessed you, and then we take the possessing entity to be ourself, instead of seeing the mind as a tool and witnessing it as this tool. So if you are identified as the witness, and the mind is your tool, you can be witnessing in the moment, your surroundings, aware of what's going on around you, and maybe you're at work, you're doing dishes or whatever it is you do, and maybe it's kind of a mindless task. You could use this moment as a way to practice witnessing awareness, to practice training your mind to be fully and completely in the now. That's a really good practice. And if you're still trying to work on witnessing your mind and getting control of your mind, this is a good place to start. But I wouldn't suggest that the ultimate goal of life is to transcend your mind, to kill your ego, to be nothing, just here now, witnessing everything, not judging it, not getting involved in it. It's good to be able to step into that place so you can find that center in yourself, that place of stillness, that place where you're not going to be moved by your own ego, by your own pre-assumptions. This kind of place that's more non-partial, that's able to witness the emotions that come up. It's a good exercise to be able to get there. But also, your mind is your tool. I have a lot of creative projects that I'm constantly working on and that I'm constantly refining. And what I do in those moments at this point is not just focus hard on washing a dish or whatever it is I'm doing, but I'm like, okay, let's use this time in the most practical way to work on my projects, to be refining. This is a good time where I can work on a problem in my mind. And I can also still be aware of my circumstances enough to know if I need to pause that process and be here now. And that's being sensitive to people around me. But if there's not really anything going on, just letting my mind be here now is probably kind of a waste of time. You only get so much time. We have a lot to do, or at least I do. I have a lot of projects. So I like to put my mind to work. When the mind is working against you or is pathological and working in unhealthy ways, it starts spinning on all kinds of negativity, or your whole to-do list, right? Like, oh, I gotta pay this bill, I gotta go this, I gotta do this. And this habitual spinning where you come back and you're like, and yeah, I gotta do that. You just wind up going in circles and circles and circles. That's how you become stressed. That's unhealthy. And part of the reason you want to learn how to get this witnessing awareness stuff going is so that way you can recognize that pattern and be like, oh, I'm spinning right now. 5 more minutes of this and I'm going to be stressed and I'm going to be in a really bad place. I need to stop this right now. Either I need to go and I need to make a list, write it down, have it as a tangible thing, turn the invisible list that I'm spinning on into an objective thing that I can fold and put away and keep for later when it's practical. If I think of another thing later, I can pull out my list, I write it on there. I'm not going to sit there and spin on this list of things I need to do that's going to stress me out. I will not do that. But what I will do is I will brainstorm. What's up, Daniel? How you doing, buddy? Thanks for coming in, checking out the video. If you have any kind of questions you want me to answer, feel free to type up down below. Right now, we're discussing meditation and this distinction between how to balance both detachment and involvement, how to have this kind of a spiritual practice of both witnessing and taking action in service. And I was just describing how a lot of meditation starts out as just witnessing, and this can kind of result in a kind of bypassing. But I was saying that the goal of a lot of this meditation is to learn to spot and stop negative habitual patterns of the mind. And I was saying how learning to meditate can be good to be able to transcend the ways that our mind winds up using us, winds up possessing us and taking us over, and how after a while of practicing and learning to become the watcher of your mind, that you can take that a step further. Notice when you get into the habitual patterns. Stop those patterns. Be here now, and also understand when it might be a good time to put your mind to work on a particular project or something that you've been thinking about, or creative something. I used to have a job and I would do overnight stocking in groceries, where there's like pretty much no one in the store. It's a pretty much mindless task. Sometimes you're straightening things on the aisle or filling up the shelves. It doesn't take a lot of mental power or problem solving type of stuff. And I could have spent a lot of that time focused on practicing meditation. It would have been great for that. It really would have. But instead of that, I put my mind to work listening to all of these partially examined life podcasts about philosophy. And to be honest with you, I feel I benefited a lot more from meditating on these practical ideas and growing and expanding my philosophy than I really would have if I would have just been focused on being here now. So I think that it's important to be able to have that tool in your toolbox. You want to be able to have control of your mind. You want to be able to spot negative habitual patterns. But I don't think that the ultimate goal of meditation is to stop thinking, or to demonize your mind, or to stop your personal cognitive development or your ability to make skillful judgments in the world. Like, a lot of this stuff is really important parts of being a practical and skillful spiritual practitioner in the world. Earlier I mentioned something about not just seeing through the Buddhist kind of spiritual lens of transcendence and a mastery of the mind and a focus and of awareness, but also this Christian idea of living as a vehicle for service, really caring about reality and engaging in it. But I also think another really great thing to integrate into this mix that I hardly ever see any integralist want to talk about or bring into the picture is these pagan ideas about self-creation and self-mastery, the idea about projection and magic and being able to harness your intentions and your will to be able to make things happen in the world. I think if you put all of these tools together, all of these different spiritual approaches together, you can really come up with this awesome hybrid type approach to spiritual practice that I talk about in my 4 S's of Spiritual Practice video, or even my video about religious synthesis and religious symbolism. I kind of talk about these ideas, about how bringing all these practices together can really result in this kind of really awesome hybrid spiritual practice that no one religion really quite gets at, this holistic approach. So Daniel, I see that you're asking some questions or you're posting some stuff. I'm going to read what you wrote and then respond to you real quick. I've got a question about the shadow that came up today. We're talking about consciousness, good things that are in our shadow unconscious awareness. Thoughts on that? Oh, what a beautiful question. What a great question. Meaning stuff in our conscious shadow is actually beneficial. Exactly, my friend. One of my favorite Joseph Campbell quotes is, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek." It's through integrating the shadow that we get the gold and the boons that the shadow monster has been blocking and harnessing. That dragon that holds and hoards gold and virgins, when you kill that monster, it lets the gold and the virgins free, you know. You get those boons. You get the value on the other side of it. It's really powerful. I'm kind of reminded of Nietzsche's 3 transformations of spirit, which is kind of related to this idea of shadow. He says that when you start out, you're like a camel, and you get down on your knees and you get a load put on you. The load is authority and wisdom and teaching from the authority, from the established conventional knowledge. And then the camel stumbles to its feet and runs into the desert, where it transforms into a powerful lion. The heavier the load that was put on the camel, the more powerful the lion. And the lion's job is to slay a dragon, and on every scale of the dragon it says, "Thou shalt." Thou shalt. So it's like there's a point at which it's good to learn the rules, and then there's a point at which it's good to go past the rules. But you have to actually know what's going on before you get to that point. And then on the other side of slaying the dragon, you drink the blood, you assimilate its power, and then you become like a wheel rolling out of its own center. He says like a child or a wheel rolling out of its own center. The child part is a little bit of a pre-trans fallacy, but the idea of the wheel rolling out of its own center is that wheel of fortune, where it's like the person in the middle is in the same place all the time, and people come up and people go down, but they have found their center. And this kind of an idea of slaying the dragon and drinking its blood and assimilating its power. The shadow monster is you. The shadow monster is the part of you that hasn't been given its due, that needs to be acknowledged
and transmuted, that needs to be really looked at honestly and loved, and not just feared, but like, what's going on with you? What's really behind this? There's also the story of the labyrinth. And if you didn't know, the difference between a labyrinth and a maze is that you can get lost in a maze, but a labyrinth leads to an inevitable center. And in the story of the labyrinth, at the inevitable center is this beast monster, which has to be slain. But there's many versions of this myth, where the shadow creature isn't killed. I talk about this a little bit in my video about soul, where I talk about archetypes and the collective unconscious. I use the example of Lord of the Rings, where you have Frodo, who has his relationship with Gollum, and Gollum is to some extent his shadow. It's the thing that he's afraid of becoming. And he has multiple chances to kill Gollum, but instead he has pity on Gollum. He sees himself in Gollum. He loves Gollum. This can be a way of dealing with your shadow. And I think you're absolutely right that the reason that we need to do shadow work is because there's something in us that needs to be healed or looked at, and not just demonized. Often the things that are the scariest, the things that are the most terrifying to face, are the things that we need to face most. Like when you go in to see your shrink and you're like, okay, I'm here, I want to work on my stuff, but this is off limits. Ignore this. This is off limits topics. It's those off limits topics where the gold is. That's where the value is. That's the thing that we need to talk about the most, in fact, because that's where the growth is going to happen. All the rest of the talk therapy and stuff, that's going to make you feel good about where you are, but the real growth happens when you look at the stuff you don't want to look at. My mom is here. Hi, Mom. I love you, Mom. I hope you're doing well. I'm going to read what my buddy Daniel said up here. Similarly, I'm having trouble understanding people who embody the light archetype, either light masculine or light feminine. Difficulty figuring out who has died and arisen again, or who is just faking light. Yeah, I think this I'm all love and light kind of stuff, it can be really dishonest. A lot of these people aren't really that willing to be criticized or look at their own shadow, and I think people who are really all about love and light, you can tell. Although, going back to this idea of the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek, Joseph Campbell has another really good quote, where he says, when God or the divinity is trying to reach you, and he uses this kind of a metaphor of the angel of death. Before it comes over the city, it's like terrifying or whatever, but when it reaches them, it's bliss. So, like, I guess the idea is that the angel of death, or this kind of ultimate judge, or this kind of archetype of God coming in judgment, it can feel like the death of your ego when God wants to break you open. It can feel like this is a demon, this is scary, this is really terrible. But once it's reached you, if you're really open, it feels like God, it feels like bliss. It's only when you're super closed and you're clinging tightly to your gold or your virgins in your cave, it can feel like the hero figure who's trying to come and break that dragon and free that gold is some kind of a terrible person instead of your savior. It's very easy to demonize and attack people who are trying to help you. Especially in the postmodernist community, you get a lot of this love and light kind of talk. And then any kind of criticism is just seen as like judgmental, egoic behavior. What's up, Joey? Thanks for coming, buddy. When really, a lot of times, if a person really loves you, if a person really cares about you, it might show up as criticism. It might show up as, I'm worried about this over here about you because I care about you. It's not just always, everything negative is not necessarily a personal attack. Oh, here we go. Does Jordan Peterson misunderstand postmodernism? Do we know, have you heard him address or assess integral thought? As far as I know, Jordan Peterson doesn't know about integral theory. I think he misunderstands postmodernism. I haven't really heard him talk about the value of a transpersonal perspective, and it seems like he also gets confused about how to use transrational interpretation of symbolism. Like, for example, sometimes he's using a very Jungian, archetypal, metaphoric kind of an interpretation, and then other times it seems like he wants to take ideas very literally. And the way that he's critical of anybody who's post-conventional is definitely a pre-trans fallacy, as I talk about in my video. Just because people want to transform the system or create a new system or get some other stuff going doesn't mean they're just being childish and rebellious. I mean, yeah, a lot of postmodernists probably don't appreciate the value in modernity and a lot of this kind of stuff. So, I mean, he's not 100% wrong in his critique of postmodernism, but he doesn't give them any of the credit that they're due either. A lot of his criticisms of postmodernism are totally valid, but the fact that he doesn't see the value in those perspectives and that he just wants to dismiss it and call it regressive seems to show that he doesn't really have that open or honest of an approach to this kind of stuff. What do you think? Man, it's great having you guys here. I see that there are 4 people who are live here hanging out with me today. I just want to take a moment to say thanks to all you guys for coming and for listening to me talk for a while, and thanks for asking questions and being interested. I really want to open up this as a conversation. My goal isn't just to talk and talk and talk. If you guys want to type things and keep some of these conversations going down in the below thread, I definitely want to crack open a bigger conversation around this stuff. That's why I started this group. Wasn't just so I could have a better way to share stuff with people who want to see what I have to share, but I would really like it if in the future this group became a place for a critical examination and further development of my ideas. I'm not done. I'm still learning stuff all the time. I still have a lot of questions. Here's a question. Let me ask you guys. I just reposted this video that was an old video. I re-edited it and uploaded it, and I talk about translation and transformation, and I'm curious if in spiral dynamics, if healthy translation will sometimes block further transformation into higher stages. Like if people think that they can just do conscious capitalism or evolutionary Christianity and still take a really reductionist view, or if putting these things into context helps us to take a bigger picture. So when you talk about the shadow, are those issues or hurts that you have not dealt with? Yeah, it can show up in different ways. It usually is indicative of some kind of a pain or a hurt that one has had, some kind of trauma in a person's life. I'll give you an example that you can definitely relate to. I remember I went to go talk to this guy who was going to maybe book some shows for me, and he was talking about, he was doing a lot of talking, and he was reminding me a lot of my dad, and it was bringing up all kinds of like feelings of uncomfortableness in me, because he was reminding me of this person who has caused me trauma in my past, and the ways that he was acting was really triggering me. That means that I have some kind of shadow to work on. Now, also, I'll give you another example that you can relate to. When I first lost my faith in Christianity, basically, for a while, I felt really betrayed and really angry. And these kinds of feelings inside of me would come up whenever I would hear anybody talk about Christianity. And that hurt and that trauma in me made it pretty much impossible for me to be able to skillfully talk to those people in those moments. Because going back to what I was talking about earlier, I would get too passionate. I would become too involved. I wouldn't be able to find my center and be calm and to move from that kind of place. But I would get caught up, and I'd get angry, and all those feelings of pain and trauma would come up again, and it would really keep me from being able to be calm and skillful and patient with those people in the moment. In fact, I was mirroring a lot of things back to them that were probably reaffirming the bad or negative stereotypical archetypes that they have of atheists or non-believers or whatever, as just being angry and just having all these emotions, and they're just hurt, rebellious children, all the kinds of bad stereotypes that you wouldn't want to play into. When you are hurt and you are angry, you are going to play into them. And that has nothing to do with the truth or validity of Christianity and those ideas, or how good it is. That's saying nothing to that. Just because a person has feelings about these things doesn't mean that their criticisms aren't valid, but it will prevent a person from being able to hear you, and that's not good. And anything that keeps you from really being able to connect with and value another person who disagrees with you, from being able to engage with them honestly and openly and lovingly, that is shadow issues. And it's definitely something I've been working on for years. But even still, I have trauma and pain around a lot of these kinds of issues, and it's something that honestly takes constant work. Even if you took it away from Christianity and you put it into some kind of other subject or whatever, if it's constantly causing problems in the world and you really care about helping the world, even if you're dealing with the trauma of it, it's going to keep coming up because the issue still exists in the world. And so it's something that you're going to have to constantly deal with in yourself. So mirroring back my question, proper translation leads to stagnation in the development of consciousness because it cuts out the struggle and the grappling. Yeah, to some extent that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's necessarily proper translation. It could just be like a holistic approach or like a more healthy. Like, okay, for example, there's a healthy translation or hack into capitalism. You can act within capitalism in the most healthy way possible, but that doesn't make capitalism healthy. And that tends to be the problem with a lot of these translation kind of hacks into something rather than a transformational view, is instead of doing work to transform the system into something that would be better, we think, oh, well, I'll have a conscious business, or I'll be a conscious consumer, and then it's all good. Well, no, it's not all good, because you're not everybody. That doesn't make capitalism itself conscious. That just means that you're a healthy actor within it. So that's my concern, is that people will take the hack as like the final solution instead of just a way to transcend and include the current system that they're in. In terms of Christianity, we could say that there's a healthy version of Christianity. Evolutionary Christianity is a healthy, mature version of Christianity. But going back to what I was saying about wanting to include the skillful and beautiful things that only exist in Buddhism or only exist in paganism, to really get the most healthy, well-rounded spiritual practice is to include truths and ideas from all of these traditions. What's up, Alyosha? Alyosha is here, you guys. Let's see what my mom is saying back. She says, that's amazing that you finally recognized that. I didn't finally recognize that. I've known about this for years, but recognizing it and still being able to act skillfully are two different things, especially when you really care. Full disclosure, my mom and I have, over the years, had some struggles around arguing about Christianity and stuff like that, as I'm sure a lot of people have. She said, but would you agree that we are not always in the right place to address those issues because it requires us to be willing to re-experience the pain? Yeah. And again, I would say that also just because a person has pain around something or is triggered by something, that doesn't mean that their concerns aren't valid. Because I would say probably in our case, there's shadow issues on both sides. I have my trauma and you have your trauma, and what would really be a healthy spiritual practice would be to, again, not avoid these things, but to go deeply and honestly in them and to see what kind of fruits you could bear on the other side of it. If you've really built your house on the rock, if you really have faith in what you believe in, no amount of criticism will ever prove something that is true to be untrue. It will only prove more true. Which is why I never really had problems questioning any of these things, because when I grew up in this religion, I feel like I really did have faith. And there's also stuff in the Bible about seek and you shall find, and it encourages the seeker to be, there's parables, you know this, where it encourages the seeker to be persistent and to continue to ask and to continue to dig. Seek and you shall find, ask it'll be revealed, all that kind of stuff. It's definitely in there. I think avoidance of criticism can be a recipe for stagnation. It's really getting into the criticism and taking a real hard, honest look at yourself and your own shadow that allows for growth. And definitely owning your shadow. Not being afraid to say, yeah, I've been hurt by this. This hurts my feelings. Let's see. Alyosha, I talked about what my position on polygamy was. I mentioned the potential for some kind of stacking. Are there any other questions that anybody has before I get off this thing? If so, type it up real quick. If not, I'm going to wrap it up, and I'll tell you about some of the projects I got coming up before I get out of this place. I'm so glad to see that these talks are having more and more people show up to them. I hope it's like this more and more in the future. It definitely gives me the fuel and the desire to keep the discussion going, and I hope the discussion will keep going down in the below comments. Our time is up, my friends. I love you all. Thank you so much for coming here today and having this conversation with me. What do I have coming up? Right now, I am currently in the middle of editing a podcast with my buddy Alyosha about Michael Pollan is his name, his new book on psychedelics and changing your mind. He recently had a talk with Sam Harris about these things, and we're going to do kind of a review of their talk. We haven't read the book. What's up, Shelby? So great to see you. It's over now. I'm just saying what I'm doing, and then I'm going to get off. But you could probably rewatch from the beginning later. I hope you're doing well. It's great to see you here. Thanks so much for coming and hanging out a little bit. Yeah, so I got that Michael Pollan talk integral review coming out, and today, after I get done with this very talk that we're having right now, Alyosha and I are going to be doing our next integral review talk about pickup community, which is really interesting. I don't know if you know what the pickup community is, but it's this community of dudes who are trying to get better at talking to women and picking up women. And it's a very interesting topic. It'll be interesting to review that community from an integral perspective. Alyosha knows a little bit more about this kind of stuff than me, and he's going to be the expert when it comes to this kind of stuff. I've seen some of these people, and we're going to be looking at it from the different stages of development, where people are talking about more biological approach, body language and psychology and things like that, and hopefully also getting up into stuff from higher, more mature perspectives as well. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. Like I said, I'm not the expert when it comes to this particular topic. You know what my pickup technique is? I'm in a band. It's really as simple as that. You just you go up to the girl and you say, "What do you think about this venue? I'm thinking about having maybe my band playing here." That usually works. Apparently, Jordan Peterson also looks at the pickup community, Alyosha said. So, one of our last integral reviews was on Jordan Peterson's new book on his 12 Rules for Life. We do an in-depth review on that book, so definitely check that out if you're interested. I miss you, Shelby. I hope you're doing well. Shelby and I used to have a weekly philosophy meetup group where we would get together and talk about ideas with other people. That hasn't really been going on that much lately. I've been kind of putting it on hold and working on videos, but I would really like to get it going again. I really miss those days. Let's see, what else? I've been working on other video projects. I got a new vlog coming out, a video about judging that I'm working on where I'm a judge. That'll be fun. I'm currently working on editing an interview with Frank Visser, so that'll be interesting. I got a couple What You Talking About Wilbur videos that are going to be coming out soon enough about strawmanning science and what's going on with the Bardo realm and all that kind of stuff. It'll be interesting. Got some stuff coming down the pike. If you haven't again checked out that new video on the pre-trans fallacy, I would highly recommend that. Put a bunch of work into that. I hope you like it. I feel like it is the new current best demonstration of the pre-trans fallacy and examples in the different lines. A lot of the other stuff out there that's on it is kind of confused and confusing, and I hope that it brings something new to the table. Shelby asks, what are my passions focused on right now? Right now, I'm really passionate about trying to grow my YouTube channel and about trying to make more and more better content. I really want to get to a point where I have enough of a caring community of supporters and enough of an audience to where I can make videos full time. That's my ultimate goal with a lot of this stuff. I really just want to be able to work on content creation all the time. I'm almost done with my new album. I'm really excited about that. I mean, really, I'm just super passionate about being able to work on making art full time, getting myself out there and being able to make a living doing it. It's my ultimate goal, and if you want to help me with that goal, everyone who's here, support me on Patreon. Like I said last time, it really means a lot to me. You can give like $1 or $2 a month, and it adds up, you know. If every single one of my subscribers just pledged $1 or $2 a month, like that's less than a cup of coffee, you know, and I'm making like almost a video a week on average. So if what I'm doing you find valuable, please support what I do, because I would really like to be able to do it full time. Thanks for helping me to turn your question into a shameless plug for self-promotion, Shelby. Much love. All right, I think on that note, I'm going to go ahead and end it for today. And in 2 more weeks, I'll be doing this again for sure. And I will post a link to my Patreon down below. Thank you, Shelby, for asking for that. I love you guys, everybody who's watching right now. I feel so blessed that we have this conversation and this forum going. Y'all have a great day. Much love. Peace.